So good afternoon, everyone. I know you guys can see us before we can see you. Dr. Chellam again with Marina at our weekly podcast, which is a day earlier. We decided to do today, which is a Tuesday. Normally we do Wednesday, and I think this is only for this week, correct?
Correct. Next week we'll be back on our Wednesday schedule.
Okay. And one of the topics that we decided to talk about is the impact of sugar in our life and our health. And is it important to know much about sugar, or is there everything that I'm assuming you know everything that you need to know about sugar?
There's always more to learn.
There's always more to learn. And that's what we found as we were researching this topic, because the commonest questions we get asked is, how do you break this addiction with sugar? Number one. What are the alternatives we can use for sugar? And I always tell people, when you're searching for an alternative, you haven't broken the addiction.
Yeah, that's true.
So a lot of times, really, how do you forget sugar? Is it even feasible? And do people actually get born with a sweet tooth? I guess those are the things that we would definitely like to address today. So one of the things about sugar, when you actually look at the history of sugar, sugar traditionally came from the sugarcane plant, which is actually a grass. And it has the stem that looks like a bamboo. And it also has leaves. And a lot of the sugar was obtained in the past from the sugarcane. And if you see, the biggest producer of sugarcane is actually Brazil, and I think India is the next biggest producer of sugarcane. And I remember a lot of my summer holidays, we used to actually chew into the sugarcane, the grass, the part of it, and it was a part of our summer holidays pastime was to eat sugarcane. Then drinking sugarcane juice is something that's very enjoyable. Now, here's the interesting part about the sugar from the sugar cane. The sugarcane juice was considered very medicinal. It actually is used, contrary to our traditional belief, it's actually used for dental reasons, to strengthen your teeth. It also helps with cleansing of the liver.
All of the opposite things that we're used to hearing.
Yeah, all of the things that we think sugar does, and sugar actually harms us. Actually, sugar cane, when you really look at the whole plant, again, this is about talking about the whole plant, and when we extract it directly from the plant. Now, there are two ways. Once the juice is taken out, it goes through the unrefined processes of how you get the brown sugar or jaggery.
Is that molasses?
No, molasses is actually from the refined.
Okay.
The refined has two layers, and I think the top layer is molasses, and the bottom layer becomes the crystallized sugar. So when you really look at the refinement process of the sugar, as we become more industrialized, there are more chemicals that are being used, and how we crystallize sugar, and eventually we came down to just this pure crystalline sugar, which is very much like cocaine, works on the same brain area, as far as the area of the brain, as same thing as cocaine, gives you the same high, and therefore you have the addiction potential. But when you look at the traditional sugar cane, I can go over the article that it actually shows. It has anti-inflammation, anti-analgesic. Analgesic means decreases pain. It is anti-hyperglycemic, which means it reduces your sugar levels in the blood, and also hepatoprotective, which I told you previously that it is helps with the liver, healing of the liver. So because it's used in the treatment of jaundice, bleeding, because it's also anti-thrombotic, which means it actually it prevents blood clots, and it is used in urinary tract diseases. I don't know, they didn't go into the details of what it used to be, but it is in the Unani system of medicine. Sugarcane juice is considered good for patients with jaundice. It's considered beneficial to the liver, and is recommended that jaundice patients take a large amount of sugarcane juice for immediate relief. So this is like completely the opposite of what we know of and what we learn about sugar in the traditional medical sense. When you look at table salt or sugar, it's actually sucrose, which has glucose and fructose.
Mhm.
Now, the difference between the sugar that comes from sugar cane is actually more natural. It's really from the plant. The glucose and the fructose in table sugar is factory produced. And a lot of the fructose really comes from corn as opposed to sugar cane.
Right. So when you're talking about basically not notching on sugar cane as a kid, that is a super labor intensive process to get the sugar out of it. Whereas now we use chemicals and we use all this crap to get the sugar out. It's a big difference, even in the last 40 years probably.
Yeah, the processing of the
Extraction.
sugar and also the type of table sugar that we actually get sold and we use has more of fructose and it's more synthetic. And because it's more synthetic, we find fructose does a few things to our body, particularly the liver.
Mhm.
It congests the liver. It increases uric acid, which is, again, the best way to put what uric acid is, it's like little crystals. They look like crystals of glass pieces that float through your blood. Of course, the commonest condition it's associated with is gout.
Yep.
Or gouty arthritis. So fructose, when it comes synthesized from corn, has a lot of ill effects, including, I think it's one of the commonest reasons why we blame our obesity epidemic to the increased use of fructose in our diet.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the history of the use of sugar in the 1750s, per year, the amount the population used, of course, the population was much less than compared to what it is now, but even then, they used about 6 to 7 pounds of sugar a year. Right now,
Per
we are
person. Right?
per person, yes,
Okay.
6 to 7, or it's per capita per annum.
Okay.
And so that's a little. It's just overall use. Now it's 129 pounds in the last decade that they have identified. And a lot of the sugar we were consuming through liquid, in the liquid form, like pops and juices, which we consider, like the orange juice is pretty much loaded with sugar and water.
Basically everything is added sugar.
Everything. Our breakfast starts off with a high rush of sugar, right? A lot of the cereals are low sugar. However, when you add the commonest food item that we eat that has sugar is milk. So people consume a lot of yogurt, a lot of milk, the lactose, a form of sugar. So we are inundated with sugar products throughout the day. I think majority of our food is sugar, and that's why when people shift to a keto diet or paleo diet, they actually lose a lot of weight because they remove the insulin activity because there's no sugar in it. But at the same time, we have to make a distinction between the table sugar, which has the synthetic fructose or the corn-derived fructose mostly, from the fructose which we all are exposed to, which is from fruits.
Right. We use the same words for a lot of different things. And that's where, that's actually a really good marketing ploy.
And I think that actually causes so much confusion because people will avoid fruits, particularly diabetics will avoid fruits, saying, oh, it has sugar, therefore I cannot have it. But I think a slice of bread has more sugar than fruit. A slice of bread has more sugar than a cup of orange juice too. Because really we're looking at 2 tablespoons of sugar per slice of whole wheat bread. So we have a little, we have to have an understanding of where sugar comes from. It doesn't have to be something that you're adding as table sugar to your food, but a lot of our food gets converted to sugar, and it does stimulate the production of insulin. And I think the bigger challenge is the high fructose corn syrup, which in fact I think the biggest challenge I see is the confusion that comes from the TV ads. In fact, I don't know if you remember, there was a time where there was like an outdoor party, and one lady was telling another lady, do you know this has corn syrup? And the lady who's serving the juice says, so what? It's corn. It's great. And I'm like, that seeds that confusion. So maybe is corn actually good?
Mm-hmm.
So
it's a plant, right?
It is a plant, right? Yeah. So I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes. But here's what you need to understand. The way we know sugar is highly processed. Number one, it's sugar is sugar, whether it's brown sugar, whether it's jaggery, whether it's molasses, whether it's agave, whether it is maple syrup. In fact, maple syrup they use formaldehyde to get the flow of the syrup from the bark. So there's a lot of processing and chemicals we're exposed to just to extract sugar. Honey is another form of sugar. So people say, I have a more natural form of sugar, but if you have existing insulin resistance and you are eating these different forms of sugar, you're going to continue to have a problem. It does not matter how natural it is and how wholesome it is. That's really not what you should be doing. Ideally, yes, if you can you actually get the sugar cane and get the sugar out of the sugar cane fresh and do it? I don't think that's even feasible. And it's difficult to buy sugar cane, so that may not be the route most of us go. So really, when you look at sugar in any form, if it stimulates the insulin, in other words, how does this insulin get stimulated? If the sugar levels reach a certain threshold, and the job of insulin is to get it down to an even keel, right? So a lot of the sugar products that we consume really increase the sugar in our blood. Now, it's also very important to understand for the insulin to actually overshoot and stay longer, because the higher the insulin, the more weight you're going to gain. And for that to happen, what happens is the receptor where the insulin actually locks, so it's like the key going into the lock. If in that lock is covered with crud or gum, then the key, even if it goes in, it's not going to be able to turn open the lock. And that crud is usually fat. So you'll find that when sugar is combined with fat, and most of our foods are sugar and fat together. Yogurt is a classic example. It has got fat and it's got sugar. Milk has fat and sugar. And cheese has fat and sugar. What else are the other things that we tend to see people having, but it has sugar too?
Just about any processed food, if you look at the ingredients, it's going to have like canola oil or even, whatever, coconut oil.
Right.
They use it as a preservative. And so you end up having the sugar because you have to make things taste good and then also use the oil. So,
right,
all that processed stuff.
So what's happened is we moved away from the sugar cane to more of the table sugar, which has the synthetic fructose and the sucrose. And what's happening now is we have started congesting our liver, and you'll end up having a fatty liver. Once you have a fatty liver, the whole system gets disrupted. I mean, we're all familiar with not wanting to have a heart attack, because if your heart stops, you're dead. And of course, if your brain doesn't function, you may be alive, but you are still dead, right? In many ways, you're not living life. However, when the liver gets congested, that is where you start losing quality of your life over the years. Your hormones get disrupted. Your digestive process gets disrupted. And then you land up having, it's almost like the whole system gets backed up, because the liver is like your border security patrol. And if the border security patrol doesn't get the traffic moving well and clean, you're going to be backed up. And that's really what happens on a lot of the culprit is usually sugar. So when you look at what happens with the sugar that we consume, it is being blamed for the obesity, for the diabetes, the non-alcoholic fatty liver, which we call as the NASH. And then you have also the biggest reason they find for this shift from sugarcane being useful for all of these things to sugar being harmful is the shift of or the use of high fructose corn syrup in the Western diet.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So we're not even looking at natural sugar anymore. And I think when you look at the sodas and other stuff where they say organic cane sugar,
Mm-hmm.
that's also processed. So I'll tell you the chemicals that they use, they say call it as classified. One is the extraction of the juice with sodium carbonate, which will give you the jaggery. Jaggery is a very hard brown sugar, which is an unrefined version of sugar. And in people who are diabetics, it does raise your sugar. In people who have insulin resistance, maple syrup, honey, agave, stevia, all of those will create insulin resistance. Now, stevia is one of those that's a lot of controversy. There have been studies that show that stevia does increase insulin resistance or increase the level of insulin, therefore can, if you have insulin resistance, it still may not be a choice for you. And you'll find people who eat certain starchy vegetables like sweet potato, beets, carrots, and then like the yucca root, all of the starchy ones, you'll find sometimes their sugar levels will be high. That's because that receptor, the insulin receptor, is blocked with crud.
Which is the fat.
Which is the fat.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the reason sugar causes increase in sugar, consumption of sugar causes an increase in the blood sugar, is due to fat in the muscle fibers. Remember, your biggest storage organ of sugar is liver. The next one is muscle. So when your blood sugar levels drop, it comes out of these two systems. Muscle dumps it, liver dumps it. And that's how the insulin's job is to help with the right dumping of the sugar from the muscle and the liver. But when you have fat blocking the receptors, this whole process is dysfunctional. And then you'll end up having not enough of the sugar getting into the cells or getting taken up by the liver or the muscle to be stored, because the receptor, in fact, the key cannot get into the lock because the lock is covered with crud and gum. I hope that gives you a visual of why high blood sugar. It's never purely the sugar, it's the fat that's blocking the receptor that does not allow the insulin to work. Therefore, there's a higher sugar.
And meat consumption plays another role. We've been talking about coconut oil and all these oils, but meat is very high in fat. Even if you're eating, lean meat or whatever, you still got fat, and you still, it mixes with the carbs if you're having pasta with it or whatever. So just our standard American diet is very high in all of those things that essentially clog your receptors.
So one of the things that you will find that when you eat meat and carbs, like you have beef and pasta or beef and rice, our enzymes are not designed to break fat and carbs. They're two ends of a spectrum when it comes to food. Accurately, the system does not work that way. You're better off having the carbs, a higher carb diet or a higher fat diet, but if you put both together, the system has a problem breaking it down. One of them does not get broken down well, and something will go and block the receptors, and that's how you get dysfunction. So your food, ideally, which we always have advocated, is pretty much high fiber. We're really looking at a lot of fiber, and we're looking at it coming from a standpoint of fruits and vegetables rather than just a consumption of a paleo diet or a high-fat diet. It has to be 86% of your meals has to come from fruits and vegetables. And I think that's where I think people have a lot of confusion. They tend to eat they'll do the whole grain pasta, or they will do pasta made with is it beans and quinoa?
Yeah, legumes. There's chickpea pasta now.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are all carbs, and then you eat it with fat like beef because you're considering yourself on a little more of a paleo diet and less of the starchy. It still causes a disruption in the digestive process, and anything that allows the sugar to float longer hours in your blood will disrupt your insulin, and insulin gets disrupted when it cannot log on to or lock into the receptors, which allows the sugar to go into the cells, and usually that part is blocked by fat.
Kind of circle back to the stevia point that you made, now that we've come full circle on the insulin receptors. A lot of these studies to this point, for the most part, have been looking at the stevia leaf.
Mm-hmm.
And what most people consume is the stevia extract. And you just kind of see this pattern of, you start off with one good thing, like their sugar cane, and over the years it becomes more and more and more processed, and it becomes crap. And it's going to be the same thing with the stevia. If you're doing the stevia leaf, there's actually really great, studies done on it.
Yeah.
Really beneficial for health. But then you start processing and you have this liquid stevia, and you have like white powdery stevia, and you're going in the same direction as your high fructose corn syrup and your white sugar and all of that other stuff.
It's the same thing as with olive. Like when you eat olives, they're great, but the minute you start saying, I'm going to do olive oil, you are causing a little bit of a problem, because it comes down to whole food and processed byproduct.
Americans don't have any moderation anyways. So you give us a little bit and we'll take all of it.
Yeah, but we look at it from an apple is not the same as an applesauce, right? Mm-hmm. It comes from the apple, but the applesauce is a highly processed version, and then you have the apple pie, which is even more processed and added stuff. So you really want to look at sugar from the sugar cane was always it has medicinal benefits actually, but when the way we are eating sugar, we're actually we have processed it so much that it's really harmful to us head to toe. In fact, I think it ages you. One of the biggest thing about sugar, which it says somewhere here, there was a study that showed sugar actually, consumption of large amounts of sucrose, which is the table sugar, causes adverse changes in various cardiovascular risk factors, which increases triglycerides, your insulin, uric acid, rise in blood pressure, increases platelet adhesiveness, which means sticky platelets or blood clots, and decrease in HDL. In fact, a lot of patients will come to us with normal cholesterol but low HDL, and then we check for two hormones called leptin and adiponectin. If the adiponectin, which is one of the hormones produced by the fat cells in the stomach, is low, then there's a consumption of sugar. They do have underlying metabolic syndrome. Consumption of sugar or the presence of sugar in the blood is a little too high.
Mm-hmm. And so sugar itself actually causes damage to your cells once it sits in your blood for too long. We don't think of it that way very often. We just think of insulin resistance and we think of diabetes. But
right. Actually, sugar is aging. It actually causes aging. Now, the other thing which you have to remember is when people have a craving for sugar, which is the other thing we have to address, there are a few things that are going wrong in this body. Number one, a lot of times you will find people who have failing memory, dementia, they tend to gravitate towards sugar. You'll find people coming in saying, my mom never wanted to eat anything sweet, but now she craves cookies and that's all she needs, pop and cookies. But her memory is failing. People who have treatment for cancer, who have cancer cells, these cancer cells crave sugar. They thrive off of sugar. Mm-hmm. So you tend to crave when you have defective cells, because each cell, every cell that breaks down sugar produces, remember the currency of energy is ATP. It produces about 32 molecules of ATP. Cancer cells and dementia cells, as they are getting defective, will break down the sugar to produce only 2 energy molecules. Mm-hmm. So what happens is they need a higher quantity of the sugar in order to produce enough energy, and they thrive off of sugar. So you'll find, this used to bother me when I used to do rounds. When people have treatment for cancer, they would gravitate towards having candy. Mm-hmm. And they would want to have soda pop. And most of the family members think they're doing something, she's craving this, she's in the hospital, she's sick, therefore I want to give her, whether it be the soda pop or candy. But actually, when you have a craving, there's a defect in the metabolic process of the cell. The other reason in normal people who have just probably a mild dysfunction where they crave sugar is when they have what is called candida overgrowth in the gut.
Mhm.
And candida, we have a symbiotic relationship with all of the good and the bad bacteria in our gut. So we have good bacteria. I call it the good, bad, and ugly. And the ugly will be the fun guys. It's fungi. So the candida is one of it. And when you have an overgrowth of candida, people tend to have a craving for sugar. So it's not only your insulin resistance, it's what is hanging out in your gut, how much of fat you are consuming, and how much of stress you have, because the higher the stress, the higher the cortisol, the higher the cortisol, the higher the sugar. And if the sugar is not getting stored in your muscle and the liver because the receptors are blocked, then you land up having a cycle of high sugar and quick aging, insulin resistance, and all of the other problems that follow with it. So you can see how sugar is very, very complex. So saying, I don't use any sugar, I just use maple syrup or I use honey does not mean much.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you still have your symptoms? That's the question you need to ask.
And if you're still having insulin receptor, they don't actually work. And a lot of these things have to be had in moderation. So one of the substitutes which we recommend in our practice, if you have to use sugar, is usually dates. Dates are very high in fiber. They have minerals. Remember, it's a whole food. And you can actually blend dates into a lot of the things that you are consuming. Of course, you need a whole bunch of dates, which makes it very expensive. And when you soak it and blend it, it makes it easier to have it. But keep in mind, you want to avoid having, if you're having a craving for sugar, you really need to look at your gut, your hormones, the receptor health before you decide, like, I just have a craving, so I'm going to have whatever, whether it be fruits or dates or honey. So I think you have to address the underlying cause of your craving. Is there a defective cell? Is there an underlying inflammation? Is there cells that are breaking down, whether it be for dementia or whether it be for cancer? Then just saying, I crave sugar, therefore I'm going to be eating a lot of the fruits. Now, I have to tell you, one of the things that we've noticed in our practice is people who consume a lot of fruits, particularly dates or grapes and what are the other fruits, banana, on a daily basis can also have an elevation of liver function tests, particularly ferritin goes up, uric acid goes up. There's a certain amount of fructose that you can eat even from fruits, and usually our cutoff is 25 grams of fructose a day, and that would be like 16 oranges. I don't think anybody does, though I should say some people can.
If you're juicing it, though.
Yeah, if you're juicing, you can easily go through that. So I think you really need to look at your hormones, your receptors, your liver function, your gut function, and then see what is the appropriate amount of fructose from fruits, which is really the good type of sugar, but still you can overdo it. If you're going above 50, what really goes up is the triglycerides. And triglycerides is like the fat, the oily cholesterol in your blood coming from carbs, if it makes any sense. And
It's bad.
It's yeah. I mean, it is as bad as the LDL or the lousy cholesterol. So I think you have to be very careful doing your cholesterol profile, making sure your gut is healthy, your liver is healthy, and hormones. So a lot of times people just go on these diets without doing any testing. And sometimes, and that's why it's a hit or a miss. So it'll initially work, but it's not sustainable. But if you know what your body needs and you change your diet based on what your body needs, it's a little more sustainable. Does that make sense? Because I guess if you know what your body needs and you eat, the tendency for you to stick to that is a little longer than you just going on a diet, because 90% of the population thinks that diet is great today.
Yeah, exactly. For today, that's a good diet. And then
Right.
changes. I mean, the amount of phone calls, honestly, that we get with people, oh, I've done paleo, I did, low carb or this or that or whatever, and it's just, sounds like you were doing a lot of different things all at once, so you're really not doing anything. So I would say what's really cool, I think what helps people in our practice a lot is getting that blood work done before and after, and really seeing, even just for 30 days of really clean eating, the effects of it. Because you see that leptin go down immediately. In 30 days, that leptin drops. For most people, triglycerides, LDL, all that stuff too.
Cholesterol actually is a beautiful, it really gets under control. Your insulin levels come down, your 90-day average of blood sugar, which we call A1C, comes down. It's really, when you look at the person's gut, you look at their needs, and then you look at their liver and put them on a diet, it's a complete shift in their physiology. And that's what we're trying to do, is shift your physiology to work for you. When the physiology becomes dysfunctional, if you don't correct it and you're just throwing things blindly at it without actually testing, then you go into the pathology, which is the disease state. And at that point, we're trying to treat and then get you back to normal. Instead of that, when you begin to feel symptoms and when you know what you're doing, bits and pieces that you're throwing at yourself is not working because it's not a systematic approach, what I would really recommend is get yourself tested, see where the problem is. Is it the problem with the insulin? Is it problem with the hormone, the receptor, or your gut? And then make the shift. We have a question here. What does 25 grams of sugar from fruits, dates look like in a day if you're trying to find your sweet spot? No pun intended. Yeah, absolutely. So actually, for those of you who have been in our program, you have a sheet called the fructose in the fruits. But let me give you an example. Like, for instance, when we talk about dates, we have nur dates and majol dates. Majol dates have more sugar, more fructose than nur dates, which means nur dates are less sweet. You can do, nur dates come above, there are about 6 or 7. We don't have a binder with us, right, at this point. So we'll grab the binder, but we do have, like, the nur dates will be just a little more than the majol dates. But let's say, I think banana will be around 7 or 10 grams of sugar when you look at a whole banana. And the highest is figs. Figs are very high. And I think we look at almost, is it a half a cup of figs on that page for fructose? I believe it's on page 17 maybe. So we have a whole table that gives you the, that's what.
Like, if you're looking, following along, this is what that sheet looks like that you have.
Page 17. I remember that from the binder.
So in 1 cup of figs dried is 23 grams of fructose.
And when you look at the new...
But a cup is a lot. So
a cup is a lot.
Eating a lot.
And first of all, figs, I don't think any one of us can eat it because it's so sweet.
Yeah.
So let's look at nur dates. I know nur dates
Right
are up
here,
here.
1 medium is 2.6.
So 1 nur date. So if you're using even 2, you're still well within the, limits. Look at majol dates. I think it's here.
7.7 grams in 1.
So you can see between nur dates and majol dates is 1 date. One has 7.7 and the other has 2.5. So you can see a huge difference between the different types of fruits. So the dried fruits have definitely more sugar, but they also do have more fiber than when you're just doing maple syrup or honey.
So that's the thing. When you have fiber, it takes longer to be absorbed. So you don't have that sugar spike and then, the following insulin situation. But when you're doing any kind of processed sugar, it's immediate. It doesn't even need to be broken down. It's immediately absorbed.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. The more liquid the sugar is, the faster it's going to get absorbed because there's nothing holding it down. And then when you eat it with fat, it blocks your receptors and then you have insulin resistance. Would only have 1 to 2 dates, cup of berries and an orange, 1 tablespoon dried cranberries.
Hey, you're making us do math.
Yeah, so you would have to actually look at how much each of those would amount to. Let's say that maybe 25 grams in the day. I just I look at the chart. Yes. So yeah, you can actually look at the chart and actually look at how many grams of fructose it is. So remember, when you go past that fructose, what goes up is the triglycerides, and triglycerides are as bad as having just cholesterol floating in your blood and the lipoproteins. So you really want to, again, like I said before, if you're having a craving for sugar, there is a dysfunction. There's a dysfunction, whether it be insulin resistance, whether it be overgrowth of the fungus in your gut, or there is a problem with the emptying of the liver. So you have a fatty liver, or the muscles are unable to empty down the glycogen stores and balance out your sugars. All of these are probably dysfunctional, or even very high cortisol, which keeps your sugar, the glycogen dumped and the sugar high in your blood. All of them can actually disrupt it. And then, of course, defective cells, aging cells, whether it be inflammatory cells or cancer cells or dementia cells, all of those can cause the craving in sugar. So if there are any other questions, I will take them. So that's pretty much about fructose from fruits. Is there anything else that we are not telling you about sugar? And just remember this, sugar does increase inflammation, sugar does increase cancer cell growth. Sugar has been shown to increase your cardiovascular risk and through increase in triglycerides. And anytime you have a fatty liver or gut inflammation, you really want to revamp the whole gastrointestinal system so your hormones can function well too.
And it sounds all like, doomy and gloomy, but all those things can be reversed.
Yeah.
So, it's not just taking out the sugar, but also what are you adding back in that always goes back to the fruits and the vegetables to rebuild your microbiome, get all your hormones back in check.
Right. I think really having a good assessment and then creating a diet plan that works for you is really
a lifestyle plan.
A lifestyle, I should say a lifestyle. Yeah, there is no diet. There are no diets. In fact, diets should be so simple that a 5-year-old can understand what to eat in terms of nutrition. But food that nourishes your cells so that you actually feel healthier is what we are looking at. So hopefully that has answered some of your questions. So the bottom line when it comes to sugar addiction, look for a dysfunction, whether it be cellular level dysfunction, liver level dysfunction, hormonal dysfunction, where stress can be a huge problem, where your cortisol levels are really high. And then, of course, looking at your gut and seeing what is the kind of bacteria. Do you have good, bad, and ugly? And more of the bad and the ugly, therefore, you have that craving for the sugar. So I think most of us know when we're not doing something right, but we just continue on that path because we don't have immediate catastrophic effects. It's not like you die just because you had a tub of ice cream every night for the last 30 nights. You don't die, you just grow fat, right? You just gain weight. And you do tend to feel a little inflamed, but since it doesn't necessarily kill you, you just continue to do. Some people don't even gain the weight, so that's why they continue eating that, but they don't correlate their anxiety and depression to the consumption of sugar. So I think you have to remember, if you have a dysfunction, dig deeper, find out the exact cause. Is it hormonal? Is it gut? Is it your liver? Is it your muscle? And then based on that, we change your nutrition plan, I should say the nutrition plan to nourish your cells the best so that your hormones can be reset and it becomes a sustainable diet. So is there, obviously we're talking about sugar, so it's a huge part of the nutrition, but do you have something that they can work off in terms of nutrition?
Yeah, so kind of going back to the stevia, if you're doing just a little bit of the stevia leaf, that's a good option to do. So if you want to put some in your tea and just grind the whole leaf into your tea, it's actually really very sweet. It has a little bit of like a licorice flavor to it sometimes, but that's a good way to go because you actually get a lot of nutrition out of it too. It has a lot of antioxidants and phytochemicals and all those big words that are good for you. So that's a good route to go. The thing is, when people ask about sugar, it's usually they're not doing sugar once in a while. They're doing it like every day, and they're looking for something to substitute every single day.
With every single meal, actually. That's where the
Right.
problem comes, is like after every meal, if you want something sweet, you have quite significant insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important to, like I said, dysfunction should just clue you into, hey, I need to look at why I'm having this. Don't just walk around saying it's genetic, it runs in my family, we all have a sweet tooth. Not necessarily. And the other thing, very important also, dental infections are a very good clue to you having. So how does dental infection and sugar play a role? We have bacteria, especially if you have teeth, you're always going to have bacteria between your gum line and your teeth, and the bacteria ferments the carbohydrates. When it ferments the carbohydrates, it produces sugar and alcohol. And gum infection also denote a lot of vascular infection or inflammation. So gum inflammation, I always say dentists can pick out easily the patient of ours who's going to be probably at a higher risk for cardiovascular disorders.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's the fermentation of carbohydrates that causes the dental or the gum disease. Okay, so that's a good way to have a quick check of whether you have a dysfunction with the metabolic processes of sugar. So I think stevia leaf, a whole leaf, and like I said, if you during the summertime, if you can get sugar cane, the actual sugar cane, and I think in one of our community, Holistic Icon community, if you guys have not joined our Facebook community, which is Holistic Icon community, I do have a video on how I extract juice from the sugar cane.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can actually add that juice to your coffee, or it's actually very, very sweet.
And it's like 500 times sweeter than sugar.
Yeah.
Table sugar.
It is very sweet. It's just that it's a liquid version of it. And of course, it doesn't have fiber, but it, again, because it comes from the whole plant, it has a lot of other medicinal properties. In fact, when you look at the traditional Indian medicine, when they use sugarcane juice, it's the juice that they use for the anti-inflammatory properties. And whereas the way we know sugar, it causes inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's pretty much what we have to tell you for sugar. So remember, if you have an addiction, look for the dysfunction. Number two, the best way to overcome addiction is to eat whole foods, which would be whole fruits. Even a bowl of grapes is fine. Now, if you are a diabetic, one of the advice I will give you is to buy this a meter that you have available today in the market called the continuous glucose monitoring meter. I think I don't have any endorsements. I'm just saying it's called Libre, Libre. You just put the monitor, it's on your arm, and you can get the meter over it and see what foods raise your sugar. If all foods raise your sugar, you have underlying insulin resistance, and we have to work on removing that resistance so that fruits don't raise your sugar. Mm-hmm. If fruits with high fiber, or vegetables with high fiber, like sweet potato and beets, raise your sugar, you have underlying insulin resistance that needs to be worked upon. So monitoring is the best way. I'm a very big believer in testing. Don't guess, always test. And when you test, address the underlying dysfunction rather than just going on random diets. Because most diets are not sustainable. I think we have seen a cycle of diets: Atkins, South Beach, the vegan, keto, paleo. What am I missing? Zone diet. Yeah. They're all the same. Everybody removes carbs, but if you look at it, the brain survives off of glucose, period. It doesn't get its food from any other form. And when you look at the ketogenic diet, it's really been studied in seizures, mm-hmm. which is really, it's a medicinal property, but it's for specific defective cells. So I think, again, removing carbs is not the solution. And carbs does not mean all carbs are bad, because majority of us, in fact, we all should be eating a lot of carbs. 86% of our food should be carbs, but they come from whole food sources like plants and fruits, which will include fruits. So if fruits raise your sugar, I think you need to work on the dysfunction, because that is an abnormal response to a normal food.
Yeah, Peggy, the name of the meter is Libre, Libre, right? Is that how you spell it?
Libre.
Yeah.
It's called the continuous glucose monitoring.
The other thing I see people doing a lot is they have a smoothie and they add like a lot of honey or maple syrup to their smoothies, or even juices, which are just super high in sugar. So you can really take all of that stuff out, take out that yogurt, and add just one date in, and it sweetens it up quite a bit.
Yeah, I think with every smoothie, we usually ask people to do 3:1, so 3 vegetables to 1 fruit ratio. And a lot of times, if you're hardcore, you could do a completely vegetable smoothie, which would have like something like celery, bell pepper, kale, cilantro, parsley, and ginger. And if you blend, it's almost like one of those V8 juices, and tomato. It comes out like a V8 juice, and it's really very refreshing to drink it, and maybe a squeeze of lemon. Yeah. So you could do it that way too if you want to do a good reset of your sugar stuff. The key thing, guys, is consistency. You can't do one thing for 30 days and then another 30 days you're jumping on another bandwagon and trying to do something different. Anything in life is about consistency. If you have decided to take care of your health, take care of your whole system till you get to that point of health. If you're going back and forth, and we find that with people, when they're with us, they do very well. When they leave us, they go back, slowly slide back to what they are comfortable, or catch onto the next new fad. And if all of those diets work, then we all would be on it. I mean, we wouldn't be the leading nation for a lot of chronic medical issues. I don't think we get our food right because we don't test and we don't personalize it. So it's extremely important to personalize your nutrition. We all have different, ethnic backgrounds and origins, and it is being well shown that your gut bacteria goes through generations. And that's why once your gut is damaged, it takes a long time for it to recover. So it's extremely important to have your testing done. So remember, as I've emphasized in my previous podcast, whether it be anxiety, depression, or any of the other things, I always say, check your gut, check your hormones, check your liver functions. And if there's any dysfunction there, let's fix it there, and work on always targeting whole foods rather than any of the processed foods. So I think with that, we will wrap up. And if there are any further questions, go ahead and post them and we will try to answer them. But in general, whole foods are better. And always our practice is Holistic and Integrative Center of Novi, our holistic icon. You guys can actually get on our website for more information or get onto our Facebook page. I think it is under my name, Nisha Chellam, MD, and you can be a part of Holistic Icon community, where we continue to post a lot of information for people to get healthy and stay well. The purpose of all of this is to help people understand health should not be unattainable. I think, like with anything else, it is a process, it is a habit, and it is all about consistency. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, are potatoes bad? No, potatoes are not bad. The potatoes are not bad. I don't know whether you're talking about sweet potatoes or white potatoes. It doesn't matter. Potatoes are not bad. But again, it depends on now. If you deep fry potatoes, when you do it as French fries, that can cause actually insulin resistance, because remember, that's fat. The fat that blocks the receptors. So I hope that answers that question. And I think, and again, when you bake a potato and if you put sour cream, I think once again, you're adding the fat. And it's always the fat that goes with the carbs that causes the problem with the insulin resistance and sugar. All right, guys, so we will wrap up because it's already time. And thank you so much for your attention, and go ahead and post your questions, and we will be back next week on Wednesday. And if there are any topics that you would like to listen to, just make sure you post them on our Facebook page, and we will try to get you as much as information as possible. Take care.
Bye-bye.